proves to Israel that Iran can destroy any place in Israel anytime it wants to. There's no place safe in Israel.
Former UN weapons inspector and incredibly informed individual, Scott Ritter. I wanted to get into what just happened a few days ago. Iran strikes back against Israel after Israel blows up their consulate, killing many of their people. If you listen to the American take on this and the Western take on this, it is, oh, wow, Iran lost. They couldn't get through the weapons shield for the most part, 99% shot down. And so, wow, look at what a big win for Israel. In many ways, it's exactly the opposite. Can you explain why?
First of all, Israel and the United States have for some time now been collaborating on building a ballistic missile defense system for Israel, not just to withstand the short-range rockets from Hamas and to a lesser extent Hezbollah. It was basically because of what happened in 2006 when Hezbollah, during that short August war with Israel, pounded Israel nonstop with rockets, and Israel had no defense. Since that time, Hezbollah's upgraded its arsenal with the assistance of Iran and its own indigenous capabilities, so that they now possess longer range missiles with very accurate warheads. And so Israel and the United States have been building this ballistic missile defense structure, but it's not even geared to Hamas and Hezbollah. It's specifically for Iran. It's specifically to counter the Iranian medium-range ballistic missile threat. The United States has deployed some of its most advanced technology, both in terms of an X-band radar they have stationed at an airfield in southern Negev Desert, Nevatim, one of the targets, by the way, of the Iranian attack. But also we plug it into our National Ballistic Missile Defense Organization architecture, satellites that are overhead, other resources in the region, all plug in to provide this surveillance capability, so we can detect a launch immediately and then track the launch as it moves towards Israel, and then transfer that data to missile defense interceptors who then can intercept with great accuracy whatever threat comes in. We tie it also in with our ships. The Aegis capable destroyers and cruisers we have are part of our national ballistic missile defense architecture. And even during this crisis, we brought 2 of them in and plugged them into this architecture to add their considerable capabilities. And on top of this, we layer Israeli Arrow 2, Arrow 3, David Sling, improved Patriot. Literally, the 2 airfields in southern Negev, Nevatim and Ramona, are some of the most heavily protected spots on the planet when it comes to ballistic missile defense. Long story short, Iran reached out and touched each one of them at least 5 times, maybe 7 times, maybe more. These places that shouldn't be hit, couldn't be hit, can't be hit, were hit repeatedly by Iran. If Israel and the United States want to call that a win, I don't know how. They spent literally hundreds of billions of dollars building an impenetrable ballistic missile shield, and Iran, not using its best technology, in many cases using older technology, penetrated it. How Iran did this is really up to the Iranians to say. A lot of speculation goes into the role played by the drones that were sent in to start triggering a reaction. Then they followed up with cruise missiles. They got more of a reaction. Then they fired a bunch of older ballistic missiles again to fine tune. And then in the end, they came in with a handful, a couple dozen of their newer model missiles with maneuvering warheads and warheads with built-in decoys. And these warheads cut through the missile defense shield like a hot knife through butter. This is a game-changing event, not only for Israel, because it proves to Israel that Iran can destroy any place in Israel anytime it wants to. There's no place safe in Israel. The most heavily protected bases in Israel in the world were hit by Iran. And if Iran wanted to have pummeled them with more missiles, they could have. Iran was simply sending a message. It's like Mike Tyson meeting me in the boxing ring and just taking his glove and lightly tapping my nose to remind me that anytime he wanted to, he could pummel me into the dirt. That's what Iran did. They just reached out and they just lightly tapped Israel's nose and said, gotcha. This changes the deterrence posture in the Middle East. Prior to this, Israel was operating under the assumption that it could get away with literal murder, that it could do anything it wanted, anytime it wanted, and everybody was afraid to strike Israel because A, Israel had this impenetrable defense shield that could shoot down any missile sent at, and B, Israel would pound you, would be Mike Tyson pummeling you into the mat. That's over now. Iran has changed that. They flipped the script. It's Iran now who has deterrent superiority. They're the ones who've told the Israelis, if you dare touch us again in any way, nationally, regionally, we now have proven that we can come in and we can hit you. But the thing as an American, we have to realize is the same technology that failed the Israelis is at the heart of our own ballistic missile defense shields that we have deployed to Europe and to Asia. We've told our European allies that we can protect you from ballistic missile threats. We've told Japan and South Korea that we can protect you from North Korean missile threats. We've told Taiwan that we can protect you from Chinese missile threats. And Iran just proved that all to be a lie. Nobody's safe in the world anymore, especially if you're relying on American ballistic missile defense, because as we learned in the 1960s and 70s, there is no defense to ballistic missiles. This is why we signed the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty in 1972, because back then we came to the realization that all you're doing is wasting money and making the world a more dangerous place. If you simply acknowledge that everybody's going to be equally vulnerable to these ballistic missiles, so why build a missile defense place? Everybody knows if we use missiles, we all die. So maybe we'll come up with policies that deviate away from using missiles, promoting peace and arms control. That used to be a thing. Now we operate as if we lie to ourselves and say we're protected by ballistic missiles or defenses, and therefore we can be more aggressive with other nations who don't have this level of protection. Iran just showed to the world, not just to Israel, to the world, that entire posture is a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you talk a little more about why the U.S. is so opposed to war with Iran? There are some bloodthirsty right wingers who, say, "Oh, just bomb Iran. We could defeat them easily." But I've heard you make some great points about the Strait of Hormuz, et cetera. Can you talk about that?
Well, there's a number of reasons why we don't want to go to war with Iran. First of all, let's put ourselves in the shoes of those right-wing neocons for a second, those people who fantasize about war, most of whom probably have never been to war. I have been to war. The war I was in was Operation Desert Storm. From a military perspective, it's undeniable. America showed that it had unmatchable military power. But I want to remind people that those 750,000 troops just didn't get there by magic. They were sent there by ships. And those ships offloaded in ports that provided a permissive environment, meaning that they wanted us to be there. They had stevedores and other port workers, longshoremen helping us get our stuff offloaded the ships. Nobody was bombing us while we were coming in. Nobody was attacking us on our way to that port. We landed at airports, again, friendly airports, where we were received. Troops calmly got off the airplanes to assembly areas, etc. If we tried that today against Iran, first of all, every ship that would be sent in would be attacked as it approached the Persian Gulf by missiles, which Iran has now shown can defeat our ballistic missile defense system. So any ship that tried to make it to Iran would have to run the gauntlet of fire and probably be sunk. But even if they got to a port, that port facility wouldn't be functioning because Iranian missiles would have destroyed that port. If we tried to land at an airport, that airport wouldn't be functioning because the Iranian missiles would have destroyed that airport. So now we have to turn our attention to landing directly in Iran. That means we have to seize a port, seize an airport. That's a frontal assault. That requires a lot of troops that we don't have anymore. And even then, as we move them in, they'll be shot down, they'll be sunk. We can't get that power projected. So anybody who thinks that America is entering this as if we were back in 1990, 1991, you're wrong. We don't have that capability. So now what we do have is we have limited power projected forward in a number of bases in the region. These bases are not well protected. They don't have anywhere near the sophistication of air defense or ballistic missile defense that Israel had. These are sitting ducks for Iranian ballistic missiles. Now, we always viewed the Iranian threat as theoretical. But after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians launched an attack against Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, where the drones that killed Qasem Soleimani came from. They struck it with at least 10, maybe more, ballistic missiles. And when we did the battle damage assessment afterwards, what we realized is, A, we couldn't shoot them down. B, they hit everything they were aiming at with great accuracy. And C, they packed a hell of a punch, meaning that if the Iranians had wanted to, they could have put these missiles on places that had people in them and killed a lot of Americans. But they purposely avoided that. But they sent the signal that if you do this again, we will take out every base in the region, and we have the resources to do it. And the United States went, they do actually, and there's nothing we can do about it. To give you an example of how that played out, Iran shot down a Global Hawk drone afterwards and shot it out down over the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump, who's then the president, said, I want to retaliate by bombing the missile sites that shot the Global Hawk down. and the Pentagon was preparing plans. But as they were briefing the president, someone said, well, the consequences for this are going to be very dire. And he said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, we're going to bomb these sites, and then Iran's going to retaliate by taking out all of our airfields. Well, can't we stop that? No, Mr. President, we can't stop that. But then we'll hit Iran with cruise missiles. Yes, Mr. President, we'll do that. But then they're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Well, what does that mean? That means that no oil flows out of there. With no oil flows, the global economy goes crazy. Oil prices go up. Not a good look. Okay, but we can force the strait open. The Navy tells me we can keep it open. No, we can't. Not without major effort, major projection of force. In order to get that force in there, it would take many months to assemble it. And we're talking about fighting a war that's going to last a year or more, and we may not win. There's no guarantee of outcome. Furthermore, we'll hit their oil facilities, and we'll sanction them and blow up their oil facilities. Yes, Mr. President, but then they're going to blow up Saudi oil fields, Kuwaiti oil fields, United Air. All the oil fields in the region will be blown up. And then we have a global energy crisis from which there is no recovery. And the American people will forever hate you because oil prices will go through the roof. Gas prices will. There will be no diesel in America. The trucks won't run. You remember that longshore crisis we had out of Long Beach, California, where all the containers were stacked up because we couldn't get enough trucks to move them out. And so Walmart shelves were empty across the country. That will be America forever. We all live in these little suburbs where we all go to the same, Hannaford's or Price Choppers or Safeways, and we expect the same thing. Meat shelves full of meat, vegetables, everything there. It's America. Well, that only happens because people who drive trucks deliver this stuff to those stores on a regular basis. But if the price of diesel goes through the roof, or we don't have diesel, the trucks can't run, we don't have goods, and America dies. So fortunately, somebody was able to tell the president that that's what would happen if he bombed the Iranian air defense site, and he backed out. He came up with a story about, I didn't want to kill lots of Iranians, I'm a humanitarian and all that.
Yeah, right.
But the reality is he probably had to change his underwear after he received the briefing because the reality is quite harsh. Joe Biden doesn't need that briefing. He knows it. He knows the truth. That's why he's saying we're not going to participate in any action against Iran, because the moment we do that, every single base in the region will be saturated with Iranian missiles, and they're going to kill a lot of Americans and destroy a lot of equipment. And there's nothing we can do to defend ourselves. Our air defense systems simply don't work. This is why the United States has been holding back on that. And I do think we need to emphasize that point, that it's not just a military equation right now. It's an economic equation that's based on energy security. And I will remind Americans at this point in time that Joe Biden, in a political move to make you happy last year, dumped oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's supposed to be for emergency use only, but he released it for political purposes to keep prices down so people would be happy. We're down to less than 17 days worth of oil reserves right now. So if we did get in a war in the Middle East, you don't have the petroleum reserve to save you. 17 days later, we run out of petroleum, and there's no recovering from that. It just isn't. And if they start blowing up oil fields in the Middle East, there literally is no recovery, because even if peace breaks out all over, you're not going to get that oil production back up anytime soon, if ever. I don't want to get into the technicalities of maintaining, but if you don't maintain the pressure in the oil fields, if you allow water to seep in, etc., you ruin the whole thing. That's what's going to happen, and there will be no oil, and we'll all live very miserable lives.